Hello, folks, and welcome to another edition of the Big Three NBA podcast. I'm Sherrod Blakely, joined by fellow CLNSer / Syracuse grad, Bobby Manning. What's going on, Bobby?
Man, I knew you were going to bring up Syracuse, and I've never seen a team that needs a bye week more.
Yeah. If we can find a quarterback in that bye week, that might not be a bad thing to, maybe a little advance on, our Christmas wish list, maybe. But yeah, that one kind of hurt at SMU. That one kind of hurt, but you know, you have to keep telling ourselves one, we got a bye week, and two, there's a lot of season left to be played. And,
There
and and
is.
speaking of, and that brings us to why we're gathering today, because the Celtics are about to kick off their at least the preseason portion of their schedule. And between now and then, obviously, there's been training camp and things like that. And we're going to get into all the nooks and crannies of all that good stuff. But first, just remind the folks that they're listening to the Big Three NBA podcast, and we are part of the CLNS Media Network, where you can find lots of great content throughout the season, based on the Celtics and things of that nature. And I also wanted to give a shout out to our good friends at Prize Picks, which is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. Just download the app today and get $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. Also, another great friend of the family is Game Time, which takes the guesswork out of getting great prices to your favorite sporting events and concerts. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Bobby, we're going to just jump right into what it's there's you can't really have a Celtic season if you're not beginning it by in some way, shape, or form talking about Jayson Tatum. Yes, we know Tatum is not going to be playing anytime soon, but apparently there's a chance, according to some reports, that he just might be back sometime this spring. Um, what's your sense of just some of the talk about him coming back then, just in a broad general sense? Like, how do you feel about that?
Well, over the last couple of weeks, hearing from Brad, Jason in bulk, right? That media blitz was crazy right before training camp started, and the video that sent everyone into a frenzy of him flying up and down the court. Uh, that made me optimistic. Like it sent a strong message to me that one, the Celtics are leaving the door open, and two, that Jason intends to try, and that's all he can do at this point is aim to come back, and whether that would be February, March, April, even. So that made me feel good. Then I saw Shams report that DeJounte Murray's expected to be back around New Year's Day. And for him, that's 11 months out from his surgery.
Mm,
11 months out from Tatum's surgery would be the end of the regular season. So
mm,
the timeline still isn't great for Tatum in terms of how long this stuff usually takes. But again, doesn't seem like anyone's ever had surgery the next day before. There's been
right.
advances with the technique, bringing guys back sooner, especially on the football field, the way they do it now. And Martin O'Malley has had a lot of success with the surgery as well. And whether it's the box jumps or the heel raises or whatever he's doing at this point, seems like he's even ahead of schedule. So he's going to try. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You just hope that, as he said and as the team has said, he progresses carefully and doesn't push too
Right.
hard through this thing. And he's acknowledged that he's not going to be back till he's 100%, and they're going to be cautious with this thing. But I don't
Mm,
see any downside to him having that carrot hanging in April, whatever it might be, that you could come back this year. And
mm,
from every medical professional I've talked to, there's no benefit to staying out beyond when you're 100%. Once you're ready to go, you can come back and start working in your rhythm and whatever else you need to do to get back to being who you are as a player. So he's going to have to do that regardless, whether it's in April, May, June, whenever he's ready to get on the court. So I don't
mm.
think it's a issue if it's in NBA games. That might even benefit him.
Yeah. On an early episode of the Big Three NBA podcast, Gary Washburn talked about a young man down in Miami in their camp who had ACL surgery, or
Drew
excuse me, had
Smith,
an
yeah, I
Achilles.
heard about that.
Yeah, who came back 9 months later. Which again, that gives that that it's not this completely unprecedented thing if Tatum were to come back significantly earlier. And the point that you brought up, Bobby, and it was something that Gary brought up as well, and I think it's really important to highlight, is the timing of Tatum's surgery. The fact that, and I've talked to a couple of medical folks about this as well, and they've said that, there's no such thing as the perfect scenario when you have an Achilles injury. But what Jayson Tatum did was about as close as you can have to a perfect scenario for someone to have a relatively quick recovery when he was able to have that surgery within hours after the injury. And just from the people that you've talked to, I mean, how much do you think that may play a factor, play a role in Tatum's recovery? And I know you're not a doctor; you
Yep.
just talk to them. But what's your sense when you talk to people about just the timing of Tatum's surgery and just what of that being maybe one of the factors that could lead to a quicker than usual recovery?
Yeah, it's helpful. I know Noah did a big article on that, and there's the atrophy, right? Where the longer you keep it torn, the harder it is to reattach and all that. So that's the big thing there is that you have less atrophy the less time you take to get to the surgery. So I think that puts you in a good position, and it can't hurt. Yeah, like it definitely helps to get in there sooner, get it done. I keep hearing about this speed bridge technique where they kind of stitch it with some metal, fiber, whatever they do with that, which has helped a lot of NFL players in particular. Some, I believe, Cam Akers coming back after 7 months. Now I think he tore his again, I believe. So you don't want to see that. I don't think we'll see Tatum that soon. Uh, it's tough to tell. This thing's so tricky. I think it's gone so many ways for different players. To hear Smith back after 9 months is incredible because usually you think of this as a year-long process traditionally. And, Durant took 15 months because of the bubble and all of that. It was a weird transition between those seasons. So a lot of factors bring guys back at different times. I wonder from your perspective, Shrug, because this is the one thing I haven't been able to figure out. Does it matter where they are? Like, if they're in the playoff mix, does that make it more likely, less likely? Does it not matter where they are? It's just gonna come down to the health call.
I think ultimately it's going to just come down to whether he's healthy enough to go and whether to me there's a risk reward no matter when he comes back. And I think
Mhm.
that's really where it gets really tricky. Because I mean, if let's say they are, best case scenario when he's healthy enough to play, they're looking at, maybe the sixth seed, or play in. And that at that point, you ask yourself, is it worth bringing him back for that? But if let's say they're having a really, unprecedented or unexpected season, and let's say they're, the fourth or fifth seed, adding Tatum back to the mix, that gives you a wild card that could potentially be the difference between you getting to the second round of the playoffs. And presumably, if he's healthy enough to play, he's only going to get better with more games under his belt. So you might be getting like, mid if they're able to put together an unprecedented run and get to the conference finals, you might be dealing with mid-season Tatum in May, which is a kind of a scary thing if you think about it. So I think the I think where they are is going to be a factor, but I don't think it'll be the determining factor. I think if he's healthy enough to play, they're going to play the risk reward game and just decide, whether or not um, it just makes sense for him to get out there. But the one thing I wanted to ask you about, Bobby, along those same lines, though, is and as you know, Bobby, we like to play games here. And one of the games I wanted to play with the Tatum question was who benefits the most from a Tatum return? Because we're talking about three primary stakeholders when you talk about Jayson Tatum. You're talking about Tatum himself, you're talking about his teammates, and you're talking about the front office. Those are the three primary stakeholders in his return. Of those three, who do you see benefits the most by him coming back ahead of schedule?
Oh, that's a good question. Obviously, the front office, I think, benefits the most from seeing where he's at. Now, you're not going to get the clear picture right away. I think from what I've heard, it's like 12 to 15 months until you're being back to who you normally are. So you would expect some trouble, some limitations, as well as just the normal process of getting back in the game rhythm after having an injury like that. So I think the front office would benefit from getting a read on where he's at. Even just him being back before the season end would say a lot about where he's going to be the following year, presumably. So I think they're probably at the top of the list because they're still weighing out. All right, 2027 is a full go. Are we going to be in position to contend again at that point? So you start to learn some stuff if you're them at that point. The team benefits if they're in that playoff position, as you mentioned there, because getting some percentage of Tatum at that point, and again, if it's like mid-April, he's coming back, and there's 2 games left in the regular season, and the playoffs are about to start, I think that's tough because then you're having this guy easing into things while the team's trying to go full speed into the playoffs. I think that's where it's gonna get tricky. But if you
Mhm.
do have a runway to the playoffs and you're in a good position, that's ginormous, and it could change the whole complexion of the season where the East is wide open. Maybe you have an advantageous round one matchup and a good path back to the East Finals, let's say. That's where you start to talk about having a great season potentially if he has the runway to get back to being close to who he is and the team's in position to actually make a run at that point. I do actually think if they're out of it and there's no stakes, that could actually potentially be the best situation to get him out there. Because then the only thing he's worried about at that point is just playing. There's not
Right.
any question about his role or where, how he fits into things or the playoffs coming up. So that would be the least complicated, way to go for him. At that point, the team doesn't benefit a ton, but he would benefit from that because, whether he's going to be doing I don't know, runs in the summer or working out with some coaches at Auerbach or however he's gonna get his rhythm back over the summer. Nothing beats actually playing in the games and having that confidence again. I talking to a lot of people who have torn their ACL, the confidence is a big thing. Being sure of yourself when you take those steps, when you try to use your athleticism, all that stuff. That's a process, and I don't think there's any better environment to do it in than actual NBA games, especially since next year after that, you're stepping in on opening night having already done that thing. So that's the least complicated way to go. I do see a scenario where they're in the playoff mix and they've built this new style, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute here. And he's trying to fit back into it, and it's like, oh, this is tough. Like you're trying to
Right.
fit him into this. You're trying to keep rolling the way you have been. Um, how are you going to balance those two things? And that could be a big story later in the year. I already feel like this is overtaking everything else at Camp Sherrod. We're seeing him on the court. Those are the viral
Mhm.
videos every day. Him just even making an appearance on the floor. The questions I'm sure are gonna persist throughout the season. Where's he at? Where's he at? Where's he at? I've already heard Missoula, because someone asked him, is he going to be in the coach's room? Is he going to have some kind of role on this team? And he shut that down and was like, we're focused on the guys who are healthy and part of the team right now. And for Tatum, it's just rehab. Like that's going to be his focus. So it's going to not to call it a distraction, but it is going to hang over them a little bit this year, especially since Tatum's making no mistake about the fact that he wants to push back as soon as possible.
Yeah, there's no escaping that it is going to be a distraction. It's just, is it going to be a distraction that's going to take away from what you do, or is it going to be the kind of distraction that forces you to focus even more so on what you
It
have to
could
do in
help
order
the
to be
guys. Tatum's coming
right?
back end of the year. Let's be in the mix when he gets there. It could help
Right, exactly, exactly. My, on the question I asked you about, I think management benefits most from a Tatum earlier than
for sure.
expected return, and it's simply because not only does it give them a better sense of where he's at, but more importantly, it gives them a better idea of how does a Tatum return look with this particular group, and it gives this group a chance to kind of define who they are and what they can do in this league without having Tatum in many respects, not no knock on Tatum, but sometimes I think these guys they use Tatum as a crutch that because he can do this, that, and the other, we don't really need to show what we can do because Tatum's got that covered. They've got a
Yeah.
long season where they're going to have to find ways to do it with Tatum nowhere to be found on the floor. And for Celtics leadership and Brad Stevens and company, it gives you a chance to evaluate these guys not only in real time, but in real games without Jayson, and then to slowly integrate him back into the mix. If let's say he's back in like March, that gives you a chance to see what does this look like going forward. And I think about guys like Anthony Simons. Has he improved defensively to where you could see a role for him going forward? Kada, is he doing the kind of things that you want at that big man position, or do we need to maybe look and try to find someone else or to
Mhm.
find other pieces? It gives them a chance to evaluate these guys both in the now, which is without Tatum, and in the future with Tatum if he's able to come back earlier. So I'm real bullish on the idea that if he does come back earlier, Brad Stevens and company, they're going to be to me the big winners in this more than anyone else. And for the players, I will put them at the very back of the food chain because I think that if he's back, that means someone's not going to be playing as much.
Yep.
And that's going to be someone who has probably played a decent amount for, the previous 50, 60 or so games. And so that's a pretty humbling thing, particularly as you pointed out, Bobby. If they somehow find a way to be in the playoff mix where they're in that 4, 5, 6 conversation, and you've been one of the top 8, 9 guys helping that's a major blow to the ego. And frankly, it puts Joe Mazzulla in a very, on paper at least, a difficult position because you've been able to win with these other guys, but you've got one of the top 10 players in the NBA who's ready to get back on the floor. And there's no way that you're going to say, you know what, Sam Hauser, you've been great, and we're going to keep playing you while Tatum is going to watch. That's just not happening. They know that. Tatum knows that. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. But certainly, that's a good problem Brad Stevens would love to have. If you've got a healthy Tatum ready to come back in March, and the team is potentially in playoff-esque position. So
Yeah, and we'll all be watching Smith come back, this fall, and Murray. How's that going? January, like the different guys who are coming back from that surgery. How's it going for them? Is it smooth? Is it seamless? Or are those guys having some trouble? Are they sitting every other night? I think that'll tell us a lot, especially for the guys who are coming back on the early end of the recovery timeline there too. And for the players, as you mentioned, Brown, White, Pritchard, those potentially being the biggest beneficiaries of opportunity with Tatum out, particularly on offense. It's been interesting to hear them because I would have expected Sherrod, those three guys coming in this year, particularly Jaylen, the way he's talked in the past. This is my time. I'm about to show people what I'm made of. People think we're going to be bad this year, but we got a lot to say about that. And to hear them go the other way, where Jalen's like, I don't buy into 1A, 1B. Yeah, I might even focus on defense, being the number one option on defense rather than offense this year. Pritchard saying he's willing to come off the bench still, even with the possibility he could start. And White saying, I've tried to make myself that, do more guy in the past. I've tried to hype myself up to do that, but it didn't go well for me. So I'm just focused on being consistent this year. Here all three of those guys focus on the team, focus on, just being steady and doing a bunch of different stuff rather than saying, I'm the star now. That was interesting because I think that could have gone the other way. And I think it sets a good tone for everybody else because it'll be tough start, sit decisions across the board here. Guys maybe not getting minutes that thought they might. So those guys setting a tone with that, I thought was pretty good.
yeah, I mean, I think they understand the fact that any type of team success is going to be team success that they call together, not necessarily one player kind of putting the rest of the guys on their back. Although they're going to be nice where that has to be the case. They're going to be nice where Jaylen is going to have to be the best player on the floor when the other guys maybe not as great. Nights where Derrick White is going to have to be, racking up big numbers in all categories because they're going to need that on that particular night. You just go down the line where guys are going to have to do that at some point. But I think it's good to hear that the mentality is that we can't be a 1A, 1B, 1C. We just have to be all one. And that's really good to hear. Really good to hear. For those listening, just a reminder: this is the Big Three NBA podcast, part of the CLNS Media Network, which is where you'll find the Big Three NBA podcast, past and present episodes, as well as other great Celtic content. And also, this episode is brought to you by our good friends at Prize Picks, which again, this they make decisions you make decisions every day, and Prize Picks being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this season, as Prize Picks is where it is a good thing to be right. It's the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash with millions of members. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. It's the best place to win cash while watching sports. Join millions of users and sign up today. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. As I mentioned earlier, you just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks, which again is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. How do you get involved? It's real simple. You just download the app today and use the code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks is good to be right. And also, we want to give a shout out to our good friends at Game Time, which the Game Time app gives you the advantage back to you, the fans. I can tell you right now, I've probably used Game Time way more than I thought I would. But that's what happens when you have multiple college football allegiances. Where again, as you all probably know, I'm a Syracuse guy, so I'm always looking for opportunities to see them, and I'm also an Oregon Ducks guy. My family is a huge Oregon Ducks family, and with them being formerly in the Pac-10, Pac-12, it was hard to get out to see them. But now that they are in a new Eastern or more Eastern bound conference, there are chances to see them on the East Coast. And they're going to be playing in Rutgers in a couple weeks. And so me and the family will be making that trip down. And Game Time was awesome in making that happen. Got some great tickets, great seats for that game, which again, makes it a hell of a lot enjoyable when you don't have to pay a ton of money to see a team that you want to play. And Game Time app, it makes it incredibly easy to use. With the Game Time guarantee, means that you can trust you'll get 100% authentic tickets on time and at the best price. And again, they take a lot of the guesswork out of buying college football tickets. And the way you get involved is real simple. You just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download the Game Time app today. Folks, we are here with Bobby Manning of CLNS Media Network. Bobby, let's talk a little bit about training camp. We kind of alluded to that a little bit already, but just listening to some of the things that have been said and written about and talked about out of training camp, it seems like there's a bit more physicality uh, to this training camp than maybe some past years. I know Peyton Pritchard, he's talked about some of the bumps and bruises that he's suffered. I know
Cuts.
Joe Mazzulla. Yes. Plural, not singular. And I guess, again, someone who kind of grew up in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s NBA, I kind of like what I'm hearing about this. How does this fit in with the roster that they have constructed? Because obviously, style of play, there has to be a connection between the style of play and the actual talent that is on display. So, how do you think this roster fits into maybe a more physical brand of basketball?
Yeah, I think we find a lot about how they're going to play stylistically, and that was the latest one from practice on Saturday. The physicality aspect, we saw the Thunder get away with a lot of handsy plays, borderline fouls that didn't go called, all that sort of stuff. Now, I think for them, they're a team that didn't want to foul much at all under Missoula. I think they were top 2 in preventing opponent free throw attempts, through Missoula's first 3 years. They were number 1 the last 2 years. So one of his mantras with this last group was, "Don't foul ever." That was a big deal going into that Magic series round 1, where Magic play a physical brand. They're not afraid to foul. They're not afraid to put you on the line. Celtics didn't wanna do that, and it was an interesting clash of styles round 1. The Celtics obviously prevailed there. It's a different roster. You said it, and Brad said it a ton over the summer. We gotta play differently to suit a different personnel. And now to actually see that manifesting itself is pretty interesting here. They're definitely going to take more chances on defense, and maybe fouls come with that. Different guys have said they're swiping at balls more. They're doing drills to try to, steal the ball a bit more, jump passing lanes, that kind of stuff. They've been super disciplined under Joe, trying to make opponents take bad shots, play positions on the floor rather than getting right up in the players. Pritchard said, I've done some of that myself, but now we might all have to do a little bit of that, pressing guys and just being more aggressive on that end, forcing turnovers. I mean, this has been a team that ranks in the bottom 5 each of Missoula's first 3 seasons in forcing turnovers, and they never turned the ball over themselves. So that's how they got away with a positive differential there. Now, if they're
Mhm.
going to play a little faster, like they've all talked about, the pace has just been rapid at camp so far. They're probably going to give the ball up a little more. So they have to force more turnovers on defense to have an advantage there. And that's going to take a significant change in the style they've played over the last couple of years. They've had rim protectors. They've had guys who can take away the basket. They've had versatile guys who can guard every position. Now they don't have as much of that. So they're going to have to scheme it up a little bit. They're going to have to get aggressive and force their opponents into some mistakes because, if opponents get into the half court against them, Sherrod, they're going to be able to target Simons and Hauser and some of
Yeah.
these guys who are going to be playing a lot of minutes for them. Cade is a guy we've seen opponents go at again and again and again when he gets into the game. So defense to me, there's a lot of questions on offense with Tatum out. but I feel like there's even more on defense given when you lose Holiday and Horford and Porzingis, who was great defensively for them. So many amazing defenders going out the door, and some of the guys who are stepping up have some questions on that end.
Mm. When you look at the guys that they do have in camp, is there a player or two that you think would benefit most from a more physical, risk-taking brand of basketball?
Yeah, I think two swing guys for them potentially, and maybe even surprise starters in one of these preseason games. I'd have to guess would be Josh Minot and Jordan Walsh, who are definitely here for that physicality, on ball defense, wing size role that they probably need. And I'll throw Tillman in there as honorable mention too, who seems healthy. That was a question mark going into camp. Where's he at physically? And he says he's in a good place. So I'll throw him into that mix as well. Are those guys you can put at the 4 and guard some bigger opponents and just go in there and play hard, defend hard, and wreak some havoc for a small amount of time. And Walsh even teased that they might do like hockey subs where like 4 or 5 guys are going in for 4 or 5 minutes and just playing like crazy. Now, Joe said that isn't the case, and Walsh just misspoke, or I don't know what happened there. That was one of the weird moments of camp so far. But if that's going to be their style, I could actually see them doing that. And Walsh is in an interesting spot. The offense really hasn't developed through the first few years here, and he hasn't carved out a role the way you thought he might. But this is the first time there's not many players in front of him, and this could be a
Right.
deeper rotation for this team this year. I think Minot's probably a better bet there right now, just given that he's gotten into some NBA games. He was in Minnesota, a well-coached team, so probably brings some good experience from having been there. I'm interested to see how one of those two guys could break through. And if you really want to throw him into the mix too, Ugo Gonzalez is in that position too. But just based
Mhm.
off what we saw in summer league and even what he's said so far, he's probably a little while away. I'd probably put him more into the G Leaguer camp right now. But Minot, Walsh, Tillman, which one of those guys are you most confident in actually getting on the floor?
Tillman, Tillman.
Okay.
I'm most confident because one, if he's healthy, one, I think he could help them, and two, it would explain clearly what we saw last season. Because the Tillman that we saw, for the most part, looked very different than the one that I saw in Memphis.
Yep.
That guy in Memphis could help pretty much any team he was on, and I know
He's
the
a
Celtics
playoff
when they made.
contributor.
Yeah, exactly. And so him not being healthy makes a lot of sense based upon one, how he played, and two, the other factor is his age. I mean, he's in his mid-20s, even though he probably looks like he's more a little bit older than that. But that's a guy that I think could, if he's healthy enough, he could be one of those wild card factor type guys for sure.
There was a
One of
funny
the things that
moment, RJ Lewis, I guess, saw him in, like, the cold tub or something, during camp and
right.
was like, "Oh, gee, how old are you?" And he was like, "I'm 26."
I know. I know. It's weird though, because like when you talk to him, he sounds like a guy who's probably 26 years old. But when you watch him, he looks like he's got another decade under his belt than he does. But good guy, good dude. The one thing that you did say, Bobby, I wanted to just kind of touch on really quick, was with so many the thing that Jordan Walsh said about maybe like the hockey style, line changes and things like that. One of the things I think that I think it kind of goes without saying, but we'll talk about it anyway, is that they're going to have to play at a much better pace than we've seen in the past. I believe last year they had like the second slowest pace in the NBA or something like that. How do you think this roster will make that adjustment? Because they have no choice if they want to win games. They're going to have to get out and run a lot more.
Yeah, and they have the personnel to do that. I was actually talking, I'm sure we'll hit on him before we wrap, but Anthony Simons could be a huge part of that. That's a fast guy, athletic, up and down the floor type player. I'm excited to see how he fits into a faster pace and how he can help generate that for them. I don't know what his role is going to be, starter, bench, how many minutes he's going to play, but they're definitely pushing him and want to put him in a position to succeed. They've really stressed the defense for him, and he's a guy that I was excited about when they acquired because I think that's the kind of player they haven't had the last handful of years here. They've been an older team. They've been a veteran team that is more methodical and slower paced, as you mentioned. So to have a guy that who is the embodiment of speed, I think is an amazing thing to try to recreate your style here. So I'm excited about Simons. I talked to Ross McMain's one of the assistants who's coaching him, and I think they've definitely focused on having him be a big part of that newfound pace that they're trying to generate here. Pritchard's a guy who wants to play fast. He said on media day, I think we have to. He's been talking about that for years, and he's tried to bring
Yeah,
that when he gets games. So he's another guy that I think this will be natural for. And Jaylen, when we talk about the Jayson Jaylen dynamic, Jason's a more methodical, size up the defense type of player. Jaylen's always been a transition player, and that's when he's been at his best. So if those guys are leading the charge for this offense, Derrick's another guy I think thrives on the break. This should be pretty natural for them. And I know the big men are saying like, "Ooh, man, this is crazy. The kind of speed we're playing at right now might not be as natural for Kada and Tillman and Garza and these guys who aren't the spryest bigs, but they have Boucher too in the mix there, and those guys should be able to catch up and meet those other guys where they're at there. So I think that's actually one of the more exciting things about this season is the different style that they're going to play here. Because as successful as they were the last couple of years, it wasn't the most eye popping style to watch them, line up a mismatch and throw it to